When a man makes a promise to someone who's dead, does he still have to keep it? William Thorne thought his fiancée had drowned 3 years ago. He was wrong. She was alive, and the man who took her from him was about to take everything else. But to understand how I learned that truth, I need to go back to the day I fired 3 shots that changed my life forever. November 1915. Thorns Peak, North Carolina. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the leather-bound walls of the study. William Thorne sat in his chair by the window, a blanket across his lap despite the warmth of the flames. At 75, his hands still bore the calluses of a man who had spent a lifetime working timber and land, but they trembled now as he lifted his whiskey glass to his lips. Across from him, 16-year-old James sat forward on the edge of the sofa, his young face tight with grief. The boy had arrived 3 days ago for his father's funeral. Daniel Thorne, William's eldest son, had been thrown from a horse and died instantly. Now the boy had questions about duty, about honor, about what it meant to be a man when the weight of obligation threatened to crush you. William set down his glass and studied his grandson in the firelight. The boy had Daniel's jaw, Eleanor's eyes. He had come asking for wisdom, and William had only one way to give it. "Your father asked me a question once." William said, his voice still strong despite his age. "He was 16, just like you. He asked me, when a man makes a promise to someone who's dead, does he still have to keep it?" James leaned forward. "What did you tell him?" "I told him a story, the same story I'm about to tell you now." The old man's eyes drifted to the window where the last light of day was fading over the mountains. Beyond the glass, Thorns Peak stretched out across the valley, merging with what had once been Willow Creek Estate. 47 years had passed, but William could still see it all as clearly as if it were yesterday. "It was November of 1868, he began. "I was 29 years old, and I thought I knew everything about duty, about honor, about what it meant to keep your word." He paused, his fingers tightening on the arm of his chair. "I was wrong." November 12, 1868, 4:37 in the afternoon. Western Timber Territory, Blue Ridge Mountains. 3 gunshots cracked through the pine forest, the sound echoing off the granite cliffs and rolling down into the valley below. William Thorne lay flat behind a boulder, his Henry rifle hot in his hands, the barrel still smoking from the last 3 rounds he had fired. Blood from his left shoulder had soaked through his leather coat, dark and sticky against his skin. 6 men. Harrison Cole's men. They had been tracking him for the better part of 2 hours, and now they had him pinned down on 3 sides. The granite boulder at his back was the only thing keeping him alive. "Thorne," Cole's voice rang out from somewhere up the slope. "The deal still stands. Sell me the Western timber rights and you live to see sunset." William did not answer. He counted his remaining ammunition with practiced efficiency. 4 rounds left in the Winchester. 6 men closing in from 40 yards out. His fingers moved automatically, checking the revolver at his hip. A Colt Peacemaker fully loaded. 6 more shots if it came to that. The problem was not the odds. William had faced worse at Gettysburg, at Spotsylvania. He had learned to kill efficiently during the war, had added 47 faces to the count that still haunted his nightmares. 3 more would not make much difference. The problem was that he did not understand why Cole wanted him dead badly enough to risk 6 men in broad daylight. Through a gap in the rocks, William caught sight of movement below. A wagon racing along the mountain road that wound through the valley. A man drove the horses hard, and beside him sat a woman in a dark dress. The wagon bounced over the rutted track, moving fast, but not fast enough. Cole's shout cut through the air again. "Cut them off! Don't let anyone through!" William's jaw tightened. He did not know who was in that wagon, did not know why Cole cared about them, but he saw the way 3 of Cole's men broke off from the circle around him and started running down the slope toward the road, rifles in hand. The calculation took 3 seconds. Run south toward cover, save himself, or fire on the men heading for the wagon, expose his position, likely die. His hands began to shake. Not from fear, but from the memories. The tremor started in his fingers and worked its way up his arms. Post-battle tremors, the Army surgeon had called them. Shell shock. The price of killing 47 men and remembering every face. William closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe. 1 breath. 2. 3. The shaking slowed. He rose from behind the boulder and fired 3 shots at the men running toward the wagon. The first round caught one man in the leg. He went down screaming. The second shot hit another in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third missed entirely, but it was enough to make the third man dive for cover. 5 men left. And now they all knew exactly where William was. Bullets slammed into the granite behind him. William rolled left, moved down 20 yards, found cover behind a thick pine. The wagon had gained distance, but it was not enough. 2 more of Cole's men were already circling through the trees to intercept it. William fired again, 1 round. The man closest to the wagon jerked and fell. 3 rounds left in the Winchester. The wagon reached a bend in the road and disappeared behind a stand of trees. William heard the crash, the scream of horses, then silence. He ran. His left leg ached with every step, the old wound from Spotsylvania flaring hot and sharp. 4 years since a Confederate minie-ball had shattered his shin bone. The surgeon had saved the leg but could not fix the nerve damage. On cold days, or when William pushed too hard, the pain became a white-hot lance that made each stride an act of will. He ignored it and kept running. 80 yards down the slope, his lungs burned. Behind him, he could hear Cole's remaining men crashing through the underbrush, shouting to each other as they gave chase. The wagon had stopped in a small clearing just off the road. 1 wheel had come off, and the vehicle had tipped sideways into the ditch. The horses were gone, their traces cut. Smart. Someone had thought quickly enough to free the animals and get them clear. William skidded to a stop at the edge of the clearing, the Winchester raised and ready. The man who had been driving lay in the grass beside the wagon, blood spreading across his chest. His breathing came in short, wet gasps. Lung shot. Fatal, and both of them knew it. The woman knelt beside him, her hands pressed against the wound, trying uselessly to stop the bleeding. She did not look up when William approached, too focused on the dying man to notice the stranger with the rifle. William recognized the man first. Arthur Whitman, a lawyer from Charlotte. They had met twice, maybe 3 times, at business meetings. A good man, competent, honest. Then the woman turned her face toward him, and William saw her clearly for the first time. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Too thin, her face too pale, her dark dress old and patched in places. But her eyes held him. Green, direct, filled not with fear, but with a fierce determination that reminded him of soldiers who refused to break even when the battle was already lost. "He's been shot in the lung," she said, her voice steady, despite the blood on her hands. "We need to get him to a doctor. Now." William dropped to one knee beside Whitman, checking the wound with practiced efficiency. He had seen enough gunshot wounds during the war to know a fatal injury when he saw one. The bullet had gone clean through, probably nicked an artery. The man had minutes, not hours. "Mr. Whitman," William said quietly, "why is Cole after you?" Whitman coughed, blood flecking his lips. His hand fumbled at his coat pocket, trying to reach something inside. William helped him, pulling out a folded envelope that had been sealed with wax but was now stained with blood. "Papers," Whitman gasped. "Contract. You need to see it." William broke the seal and unfolded the document. It took him only seconds to read the key passages, but those seconds changed everything. The contract had been signed 25 years ago in 1843. 2 signatures at the bottom, Daniel Thorne and Thomas Ashford, William's father and the owner of Willow Creek Estate. A marriage contract, binding the families together through their children. Eleanor Ashford, only daughter of Colonel Thomas Ashford, promised in marriage to William Thorne, only son of Daniel Thorne. Upon the death of either parent, or upon Eleanor reaching her majority, the contract would take effect. The union would transfer ownership of Willow Creek Estate, all 3,000 acres, to William Thorne. William stared at the paper, his mind racing through the implications. Willow Creek Estate, 3,000 acres of prime North Carolina mountain country. adjacent to his own land. Combined, the two properties would create the largest single holding in the Blue Ridge, controlling not just timber, but water rights, mineral rights, and access to every major trade route through the mountains. Harrison Cole had been trying to buy Willow Creek for years. If this contract was valid, Cole would never get it. But there was more. A second page folded behind the first. William pulled it free and read the handwriting, a letter written in his mother's hand. The woman Eleanor spoke again. Mr. Whitman was bringing me the contract. My father died 3 days ago. The will was read this morning. My stepmother, Victoria Ashford, she claimed the estate. Said I had no legal right because I'm... She hesitated. Because my mother was not married to my father when I was born. William looked up sharply. But your father acknowledged you. He gave me his name. I lived in his house for 24 years, but Victoria says that doesn't matter. She called her lawyer to challenge any claim I might have. Whitman grabbed William's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. Protect her, he whispered. That's your duty, your father's promise. You have to keep it. Gunshots rang out from up the slope. Cole's men were getting closer. William made his decision in the space between heartbeats. He stood pulling Eleanor to her feet. Can you run? What about Mr. Whitman? He's dead. William said it flatly, without cruelty. If you stay, you will be too. Eleanor looked down at the lawyer, her jaw tightening. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. They ran. William led her into the forest, away from the road, heading east toward higher ground where the pines grew thick enough to hide their tracks. Behind them he heard Cole's men reach the wagon, heard the shouts, the cursing, then more gunfire as they realized their targets had escaped. For 2 hours they ran and climbed and scrambled through underbrush that tore at their clothes and skin. Eleanor kept pace without complaint, even when she stumbled and fell, even when blood began to soak through her dress from cuts on her legs and arms. She simply got back up and kept moving. William respected that. He had seen soldiers break under less. By the time they reached the small cave he had scouted months ago as a potential shelter, night had fallen completely. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees, cold enough that their breath came out in white clouds. William built a small fire deep in the cave where the light would not be visible from outside, then pulled dried meat and a canteen from his pack. Eleanor sat across from him, shivering in her wet, torn dress. William removed his spare coat from the pack and tossed it to her. Put it on. You'll die of hypothermia before Cole finds us. She caught the coat and pulled it on without argument. For several minutes they sat in silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird outside. Finally Eleanor spoke. Why did you save me? William did not look up from his task of reloading the Winchester. Right place, right time. That's not true. You read the contract. You know who I am. I know my father signed a piece of paper 25 years ago. That doesn't mean I know anything about you. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her green eyes catching the firelight. Then why risk your life? William set down the rifle and met her gaze directly. Because when I saw those men chasing your wagon, I saw someone else, someone I couldn't save 3 years ago. The words came out before he could stop them. William cursed himself silently. He did not talk about Sarah, had not spoken her name aloud in months. But Eleanor did not press. Instead, she said quietly, My father died 3 days ago. The will was read this morning. Mr. Whitman came to tell me about the contract. Victoria, my stepmother, she was furious. She said I had no right to anything, that I was a bastard child with no legal claim. But your father gave you his name. He did. And Mr. Whitman said that was enough legally, that the contract was binding. But Victoria has money, and she has lawyers, and she has Harrison Cole. William's jaw tightened at the name. What's Cole's connection to your stepmother? I don't know, but they spoke together after the will was read, and then Whitman told me we had to leave immediately. He had a wagon waiting. We made it 6 miles before Cole's men found us. William pulled out the second paper, the letter in his mother's handwriting. He had read it 3 times already, but the words still felt unreal. My dearest William, the letter began. If you are reading this, I am gone. There are things you must know about the contract with the Ashfords. Your father made it for business. I made him swear to honor it for love, for friendship. Grace Ashford was my dearest friend, and when she died, I promised to protect her daughter, Eleanor. That child will grow up in a house without love, under a stepmother who sees her as a rival. The contract is not just about land or timber. It is about giving Eleanor a chance to be seen, valued, loved. You do not have to marry her if you do not love her, but promise me you will at least meet her, give her a choice, protect her from those who would harm her. Love is not always convenient, my son, but it is always worth fighting for. Your loving mother, Catherine Thorne. William folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into his coat. His mother had died 6 years ago when he was 23. He had never received this letter, never knew it existed until Whitman pulled it from his pocket along with the contract. Your mother and mine were friends, Eleanor said softly, watching him. Did you know that? No. Mr. Whitman told me. He said they grew up together, stayed close even after they married. When my mother died, I was 3 years old. Your mother wrote to my father begging him to make sure I would be protected. And he made the contract. Yes, but then he remarried. Victoria convinced him that I was better off invisible, that it protected me from scrutiny, from gossip. Eleanor's voice hardened. For 24 years, I lived in that house like a ghost. I managed the accounts, mended the clothes, worked in the kitchen. But I was never allowed at dinner parties, never introduced to guests, never acknowledged as his daughter except in name. William studied her across the fire. She sat straight despite her exhaustion, chin lifted, hands steady on her knees. There was strength in her, a core of steel that Victoria Ashford had tried and failed to break. Cole wants you dead, William said bluntly. If you marry me and we claim Willow Creek Estate, Victoria loses everything, which means Cole loses his chance to buy the land and timber rights. He's already tried to kill you once today. He won't stop. I know. Which means you have a choice. I can take you to Charleston, put you on a train to somewhere far away, give you enough money to start over where no one knows your name, or you can stay and we see this through. Eleanor met his eyes without flinching. And if I stay, what then? Then we honor the contract. We get married, we claim Willow Creek, and we make damn sure Cole and your stepmother can't touch you. You would marry me, a woman you've known for 4 hours. William reloaded his revolver with methodical precision, not looking at her. I've already made my choice. I fired those shots that saved you. That means I'm committed whether I like it or not. The question is whether you're willing to accept help from a stranger. I don't want you to marry me out of obligation. Too late. My mother made a promise to your mother. My father made a contract with your father. Both of them are dead, and someone has to keep their word. His voice hardened. And I always keep my word. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I think you're punishing yourself. William's hands stilled on the revolver. You don't know anything about me. I know you counted exactly how many men you killed in the war. I know someone named Sarah died 3 years ago, and you think it's your fault. I know you're trying to save me because you couldn't save her. The silence stretched taut between them. William forced himself to finish loading the revolver, each movement precise and controlled. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Sarah Bennett was my fiancée. They found her body in the river 3 years ago. Drowned, they said. But Sarah knew how to swim. I taught her myself. He slid the revolver back into its holster. There was something wrong about it. Something I should have investigated. But I was too much of a coward. I just accepted it and buried myself in work. That's not cowardice. That's grief. Call it what you want. The fact remains I failed her. I won't fail you. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. Then don't marry me because of guilt. If we do this, I want it to be a real partnership, not an obligation, not a penance, a choice. William looked at her across the firelight, really looked at her. She was offering him something he had not felt in 3 years, something that terrified him more than Cole's guns or the memories of war. She was offering him a chance to try again. Before he could respond, a sound cut through the night. hoofbeats still distant but getting closer. William was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He kicked dirt over the fire, plunging them into darkness. "Stay here. Stay quiet." He moved to the cave entrance and peered out into the forest. Moonlight filtered through the pine branches, casting everything in silver and shadow. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Voices carried through the trees, too far away to make out words, but close enough to be a threat. William counted. 4 horses, which meant at least 4 men, possibly more if they were riding double. They would not find the cave tonight, not in the dark, but come morning with proper tracking, Cole's men could pick up the trail. William and Eleanor needed to move before dawn, and they needed to move fast. He returned to where Eleanor waited in the darkness. "We leave in 3 hours. Get what rest you can." "Where are we going?" "Thorn's Peak, my home. It's 18 miles east. If we push hard and Cole doesn't catch us, we can make it by tomorrow afternoon. And then we get married, as soon as possible." He heard her sharp intake of breath. "That fast?" "Cole won't stop. Your stepmother won't stop. The only way to protect you legally is to make the contract impossible to break." William's voice hardened with determination. "We marry. We claim Willow Creek, and then we see who dares to challenge us." 10 miles away, Harrison Cole sat by a campfire with his remaining men scattered around him. 4 dead, 2 wounded, badly enough to be useless. That left 6 men capable of fighting, counting himself. Not terrible odds for hunting down 1 man and a woman. But William Thorne was not just any man. Cole knew that better than most. Thompson's dead. One of his men reported coming in from checking on the wounded. Carter's not going to make it through the night. Lung shot. Cole nodded without emotion. "Bury them at first light. Then we track Thorne and the woman. They'll be long gone by morning." "No." Cole smiled, cold and certain. "Thorne won't run. He'll head for Thorn's Peak. He thinks he can protect her there with his men and his walls and his guns." The smile widened. "He's wrong." Another of his men, a lean tracker named Sullivan, spoke up. "Why do we care about this woman so much? Victoria Ashford's paying us, sure, but not enough to lose 6 men. Cole stood and walked to the edge of the firelight, looking east toward where he knew Thorn's Peak lay hidden in the mountains. "This isn't about the woman, Sullivan. It's about William Thorne. It's about breaking him." "Why?" Cole turned back to face his men. The firelight caught his face, making his expression seem almost thoughtful. 3 years ago, I made Thorne's fiancée an offer. Her father owed me $5,000, gambling debts. I told her I would forgive the debt if she would leave Thorne, disappear, make him think she was dead. The men shifted uncomfortably. This was the kind of story that made even hardened killers uneasy. "She refused at first," Cole continued. "Said she loved him. So I told her that if she didn't cooperate, I would kill her father, slowly, and I would make sure she watched." He paused. "She agreed." "So Sarah Bennett didn't drown?" Sullivan said slowly. "Of course not. I paid her $5,000, put her on a train to California, and never saw her again. But I made sure everyone found a body in the river. A prostitute about the right age and build. Enough damage from the water that identification was difficult." Cole's voice held a note of pride. "Thorne believed it. He mourned her. And for 3 years he's been dead inside, just going through the motions of living. And now I'm going to do it again. I'm going to take Eleanor Ashford away from him, one way or another, and when I do, William Thorne will finally break completely." Cole looked around at his men. "That's why we're here. Not for Victoria's money, not for the land, because some men need to be destroyed, and Thorne is one of them." The men were silent. Finally, Sullivan asked, "What did Thorne ever do to you?" Cole's expression went flat, all emotion draining from his face. He said no. "When I tried to buy his western timber rights, when I offered him fair price, good terms, a partnership that would have made us both rich, he looked me in the eye and said no. No explanation, no negotiation, just no." He picked up his shotgun and checked the load. "No one says no to me, Sullivan, no one. And anyone who does learns what that costs. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Cole's men exchanged glances, and in that moment they understood. They were not working for a businessman who played hard. They were working for a man who took rejection as a personal wound, who could not bear the thought of anyone having power over him. It made him unpredictable, dangerous, the kind of employer who might pay well, but who might also turn on his own men if they failed him. Sullivan made a mental note to collect his money and quit as soon as this job was done. Dawn came cold and gray. William woke Eleanor an hour before first light gave her dried meat and water, then led her out of the cave and east through the forest. They moved in silence, William setting a brutal pace that he knew would test Eleanor's endurance. She was not used to this kind of physical exertion, that much was obvious from the way she moved, but she kept up without complaint, her jaw set, her breathing controlled. By mid-morning they had covered 8 miles. William called a brief halt by a stream, allowing Eleanor to drink and rest for 10 minutes. No more. Every minute they stopped was a minute Cole gained on them. "How much further?" Eleanor asked, splashing cold water on her face. 10 miles. Another 5 hours if we keep this pace." "I can keep going." William studied her. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead despite the cold. Her hands were scraped raw from catching herself on falls. Her dress, already damaged from yesterday, now hung in tatters around her legs. But her eyes were clear and determined. "Good," he said simply, and started walking again. They reached Thorn's Peak at 2 in the afternoon. The house rose from the mountainside like something organic, built from the same stone and timber as the land itself. 2 stories wide porches windows that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back in golden flashes. Eleanor stopped at the edge of the tree line, staring. "This is your home." "Yes." "It's beautiful." William did not respond. He had built Thorn's Peak over the last 5 years, pouring his grief and rage and guilt into every beam and stone. It was solid, defensible, a fortress against the world, but he had never thought of it as beautiful. Mrs. Hayes appeared on the porch before they had crossed half the distance to the house. She was 60 years old, had been with the Thorn family since William was a child, and could read him better than anyone alive. One look at his face, at the blood on his clothes, at the woman beside him, and she understood that everything had changed. "Mr. Thorn," she said calmly, as if he brought home bloodied strangers every day. "Shall I prepare the east wing?" "Yes, and send someone to town for the marshal. Tell him Harrison Cole murdered Arthur Whitman and is hunting Miss Ashford. We need protection." Mrs. Hayes's eyes widened fractionally, but she simply nodded. "And the doctor, sir?" "Not necessary. The wounds are superficial." "I meant for you, Mr. Thorn. You're bleeding." William glanced down at his shoulder, having almost forgotten the gunshot wound from yesterday. The bleeding had stopped hours ago, and the pain was a dull throb he had learned to ignore. Later, first get Miss Ashford settled. Mrs. Hayes turned to Eleanor, her expression softening. "Welcome home, Miss Eleanor." Eleanor blinked. I'm only—" Mr. Thorn sent word ahead. "Mrs." Hayes said smoothly, the lie coming easily. "You're to be treated as the future mistress of Thorn's Peak." William shot Mrs. Hayes a grateful look. The housekeeper had understood immediately what was needed to establish Eleanor's position before anyone could question it. Eleanor started to protest again, but William cut her off. "We'll discuss the details later. For now you need food, rest, and clean clothes. Mrs. Hayes will see to everything." He turned to the housekeeper. "And send for Edmund Porter, my lawyer. Tell him we need him here by tomorrow morning at the latest. We're going to need legal documents prepared." Mrs. Hayes's eyebrows rose. "What kind of documents, sir?" "Marriage documents. Miss Ashford and I are getting married in 3 days." If Mrs. Hayes was surprised, she hid it perfectly. "Very good, sir. Will there be anything else?" "Yes." William's voice dropped, becoming harder, colder. "Double the guard on all approaches to the property. No one gets within a mile of this house without being challenged. Anyone who tries to force their way through you, shoot first and ask questions later." Now Mrs. Hayes did look alarmed. "Sir, is the threat that serious?" "Cole has already killed 3 people today, 4 counting Whitman. He won't hesitate to attack here if he thinks he can succeed." William met her eyes. "I need you to make sure every man on this property understands. This is not about theft or trespassing. This is about survival. Anyone who comes at us, we put them down." Mrs. Hayes nodded slowly. "I'll inform the men immediately." She guided Eleanor into the house, leaving William alone on the porch. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the mountains that surrounded Thorn's Peak on all sides. Somewhere out there, Cole was coming, and when he arrived, there would be blood. William had kept himself isolated for 3 years, wrapped in grief and guilt and the numbness of overwork. He had convinced himself that he did not care whether he lived or died, that nothing mattered except building his timber empire and drowning in exhaustion every night so he would not have to dream. But now, with Eleanor Ashford depending on him, with the promise he had made to his dead mother, weighing on him, William found something stirring in his chest that he had thought long dead. Purpose. He would keep Eleanor safe. He would honor the contract. He would stop Cole and Victoria Ashford and anyone else who tried to harm the woman his mother had asked him to protect. And if it cost him his life, so be it. At least he would die doing something that mattered. 3 days later, at 10 in the morning, William Thorn and Eleanor Ashford would stand in the garden behind Thorn's Peak and speak vows that neither of them was sure they believed. But that was still in the future. For now, William had preparations to make, defenses to organize, and a promise to keep to 2 women who had trusted him with their dying wishes. Inside the house, Eleanor stood in the center of the suite Mrs. Hayes had prepared for her, turning slowly to take in the bedroom, the sitting room, the dressing area with its wardrobes and full-length mirror. It was larger than the servants' quarters at Willow Creek, where she had spent most of her life. Larger and infinitely more welcoming. On the bed lay 3 dresses, all new, all in her size. How William had known her measurements, she could not guess. Perhaps his mother had included that information in her letters to her father. Perhaps Mrs. Hayes had simply made an educated guess. Either way, for the first time in years, Eleanor had clothing that actually fit her, that had not been handed down or altered multiple times. She sat down on the edge of the bed, and only then did she allow herself to feel the weight of everything that had happened in the last 30 hours. Her father's death, the will, the revelation of the contract, Whitman's murder, the flight through the mountains, and now this, an offer of marriage from a man she barely knew, a man who was driven by duty and guilt rather than any feeling for her. She should refuse. Should take William's offer of money and passage to Charleston, start over somewhere far away where Victoria and Cole could never find her. But even as the thought formed, Eleanor knew she would not leave. Not because she had nowhere else to go, though that was true. Not because she was afraid of Victoria, though that was also true. She would stay because for the first time in 24 years, someone had looked at her and seen a person worth saving, worth protecting, worth making promises for. William Thorn did not love her, might never love her, but he had chosen to stand between her and death, and that was more than anyone else had ever done. Tomorrow, the lawyer would arrive. The day after that, they would formalize the contract, and 3 days from now, Eleanor Ashford would become Eleanor Thorn, bound to a man she was only beginning to understand. But tonight, she was safe. She had food, shelter, clean clothes, and a locked door between her and the world. For a woman who had spent most of her life invisible and unwanted, that was more than enough. She lay back on the bed so soft it felt like sinking into a cloud, and allowed herself to sleep for the first time in 3 days without fear of what would come when she woke. In his study, William sat at his desk and pulled out the letter from his mother one more time. He read it through slowly, carefully, as if the words might change if he looked at them long enough. They did not change. His mother had loved Grace Ashford, had promised to protect Eleanor, had bound William to that promise through a contract signed before he was even born. He should be angry, should resent the weight of obligation that had been placed on his shoulders without his consent. Instead, he felt something that might have been relief. For 3 years William had drifted through his life like a ghost, building his empire, but feeling nothing, caring about nothing, surviving, but not living. Sarah's death had hollowed him out, left him with only duty and routine to fill the emptiness. Now, suddenly, he had a purpose again. Someone who needed him. Something worth fighting for. It was not love, he knew that. Love required time, understanding, shared experience. He and Eleanor were strangers bound together by circumstance and the promises of the dead. But it was a beginning, and for a man who had been dead inside for 3 years, even a beginning felt like resurrection. William folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of his desk, then locked the drawer with a small key he kept on a chain around his neck. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and documents and preparations for a wedding that would bind two strangers together for life. Tonight he would sleep in his own bed with his rifle within arm's reach and his doors locked and barred, knowing that somewhere in the darkness Harrison Cole was planning his next move. The game had been set in motion, the pieces were on the board, and William Thorne, who had learned in 4 years of war how to kill efficiently and without mercy, was preparing himself to do it again if that was what it took to keep his promise. Outside the mountains stood silent under the stars. Inside Thorne's Peak, two people who had lost everything were taking their first steps toward something neither of them could yet name. But in 3 days they would stand together and speak words that would change both their lives forever. The story of the mountain man and the invisible woman had only just begun. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the East Wing suite, casting geometric patterns across the polished wooden floor. Eleanor stood at the window watching as William Thorne moved through the yard below his Winchester rifle, held with the easy confidence of a man who had carried weapons for most of his adult life. He was drilling the ranch hands, teaching them defensive positions, turning farmers and loggers into something approaching soldiers. 3 days had passed since they arrived at Thorne's Peak. 3 days during which Eleanor had lived in luxury. She had never imagined wearing clothes that actually fit her body, eating meals prepared specifically for her rather than scraps from someone else's table. Mrs. Hayes treated her like the mistress of the house. The workers tipped their hats when she passed, and no one looked through her as if she were invisible. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like waiting for the axe to fall. Through the window she watched William finish his instructions and dismiss the men. He stood alone in the yard for a moment, his shoulders tight, his left hand flexing and unflexing in a pattern Eleanor had learned to recognize. The tremor, the involuntary shaking that sometimes seized him when stress or memories overwhelmed his carefully maintained control. She had seen it happen twice now, once when a door slammed unexpectedly and once when one of the men dropped a box of ammunition. Both times William had frozen for 3 or 4 seconds, his face going blank, his hands beginning to shake. Then he would force himself to breathe, count silently, and the tremor would pass. Post-battle tremors, Mrs. Hayes had explained quietly. Shell shock from the war. The price William paid for being efficient at killing when his country needed him to be. Eleanor turned away from the window and examined the dresses laid out on her bed. Mrs. Hayes had produced them from somewhere, all in shades of blue and gray that complemented her coloring. For tomorrow's wedding there was a simple white dress, elegant without being ostentatious. Appropriate for a woman marrying a man she barely knew, joining her life to his because duty and circumstance left them no other choice. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Hayes entered carrying a tea tray, her expression carefully neutral in the way Eleanor had learned meant the housekeeper wanted to say something but was not sure if she should. "You have questions," Eleanor said, gesturing for Mrs. Hayes to sit. "You can ask them." The older woman set down the tray and poured tea with practiced efficiency. "It's not my place to question Mr. Thorne's decisions. But you're wondering why he's marrying a woman he met 4 days ago. I'm wondering if you understand what you're getting into, Miss Eleanor." Mrs. Hayes met her eyes directly. "William Thorne is a good man, but he's also a man who's been dead inside for 3 years, since Sarah Bennett died." Eleanor's hands tightened on her teacup. "Tell me about her." Mrs. Hayes sighed and settled back in her chair. Sarah was the daughter of a lawyer in Charlotte. Beautiful girl, bright, full of life. She and William were engaged to be married. He was different then. He laughed. He talked about the future. He actually seemed to believe that life could be something more than just surviving from one day to the next. What happened to her? They found her body in the river, said she drowned. But Sarah was a strong swimmer. William had taught her himself. Mrs. Hayes's voice dropped. He never believed the official story. I think part of him always suspected something was wrong, but he was too afraid to dig deeper, too afraid of what he might find. So he just accepted it and threw himself into work, built this place into an empire, made himself into the most successful timberman in 3 states, and killed everything inside himself in the process. Eleanor set down her teacup. And now he's marrying me to fulfill an obligation to his dead mother. Is that what you think? Isn't it? Mrs. Hayes studied her for a long moment. I've known William since he was 8 years old. I watched his father try to beat all the softness out of him, tried to turn him into a man who valued nothing except business and power. Catherine Thorne, his mother, she fought against that, taught him that feelings weren't weakness, that caring about people mattered more than owning land. But she died. She did. And Daniel Thorne finished what he'd started. By the time William was 20, he'd learned to hide everything he felt. Made himself into the kind of man his father wanted. Hard, controlled, efficient. Mrs. Hayes leaned forward. But I'll tell you something, Miss Eleanor. In the last 4 days, I've seen him care about something again. Seen him angry, protective, determined. He's not dead inside anymore, and that's because of you. He doesn't love me. No, but he's chosen to protect you. And for William Thorne, that choice means something. It means he's willing to fight again, to risk again, to feel again. The housekeeper stood and moved toward the door. The question is whether you're strong enough to stand beside him when the fighting comes, because Cole won't stop, and Victoria won't stop, and this marriage will make you a target for the rest of your life. After Mrs. Hayes left, Eleanor returned to the window. Below, William was checking rifles with methodical precision. 20 weapons laid out on a table, each one cleaned, loaded, and ready for use. The preparations of a man who expected violence and refused to be caught unprepared. She should be terrified, should be planning her escape. Instead, she found herself thinking about the way William had looked at her last night in the library when she had told him she wanted their marriage to be a real partnership. For just a moment, his careful mask had slipped, and she had seen something vulnerable beneath the surface, something that wanted to believe, but was afraid to hope. Eleanor understood that feeling. She had lived most of her life invisible, unwanted, convinced that she deserved nothing better. But in 4 days, William Thorne had looked at her and seen a person worth saving, worth protecting, worth making promises for. That was not love, but it was something. And for now, something was enough. The office of Marshal Daniel Thompson occupied the ground floor of a modest building on the main street of the nearest town, 15 miles from Thorne's Peak. William arrived just after noon, his horse lathered from the hard ride, his Winchester rifle still holstered on his saddle. Thompson looked up from his desk as William entered, his weathered face showing no surprise. The marshal was 55 years old, had served in the same regiment as William during the war, and knew better than most what the younger man was capable of when pushed. "Figured I'd be seeing you," Thompson said, gesturing to a chair. "Edmund Porter was here this morning filing papers about a marriage contract. Then I got word that Arthur Whitman was found dead 15 miles west of here, shot through the lung." William sat down, his posture controlled, but his hands tight on the arms of the chair. "Cole killed him, along with 3 of his own men that I shot while protecting Miss Ashford. You have proof. I have the word of Miss Ashford, who was there when Whitman died, and I have this." William pulled out the marriage contract and laid it on the desk. "Whitman was bringing this to Eleanor when Cole's men attacked. Cole wants her dead because if she marries me, Victoria Ashford loses Willow Creek Estate, and Cole loses his chance to buy the timber rights." Thompson read through the contract carefully, his expression growing more serious with each paragraph. "This is legal, notarized, witnessed, filed with the court. If you marry Miss Ashford, this gives you ownership of 3,000 acres adjacent to your own land, which makes me the largest landowner in the Blue Ridge, which makes me someone Cole can't afford to ignore. and you're willing to marry a woman you don't know to make this happen." William's jaw tightened. "I'm willing to honor a promise my mother made to Miss Ashford's mother. I'm willing to protect an innocent woman from being murdered. And I'm willing to stop Harrison Cole from getting away with killing good men like Arthur Whitman." Thompson leaned back in his chair. "Cole has an alibi. He was in Charleston when Whitman was shot. Victoria Ashford vouched for him, signed a statement saying Cole was with her discussing legal matters related to her late husband's estate." "That's impossible. I saw Cole in the mountains. I heard his voice." "I believe you, but without a body, without witnesses beyond you and Miss Ashford, I can't arrest him. Cole's lawyers will tear apart any case I try to build." Thompson paused. "Unless you've got something more." William stood abruptly and walked to the window, his control beginning to fray. His left hand started to shake, and he clenched it into a fist, forcing himself to breathe. 1, 2, 3. The tremor slowed, but did not entirely stop. Thompson watched without comment. He had seen enough men break after the war to recognize the signs. "I have a question," William said finally, his voice tight. "If a man makes a promise to someone who's dead, does he still have to keep it?" "Depends on the promise. My mother asked me to protect Eleanor Ashford, to give her a chance at a life free from the people who'd spent 24 years making her invisible. She asked me to honor the contract not just for business, but for friendship, for love. And you're asking if that obligation still stands now that your mother's gone. I'm asking if I'm doing the right thing." William turned from the window, and Thompson saw something in his eyes that made the older man's chest tighten. "Because I failed Sarah. I didn't protect her. I didn't even try to find out the truth about her death. I just let her go and convinced myself that grief was enough, that surviving was enough. Well, you can't save Eleanor to make up for losing Sarah." "I know that." William's voice dropped. "But I can keep a promise to my mother. I can stand between an innocent woman and the men trying to kill her. And maybe if I do this right, I can learn to live again instead of just surviving." Thompson stood and moved around the desk to grip William's shoulder. "Then marry the girl, claim the land, build your defenses, and when Cole comes, because he will come, you put him down hard. Legal or not, I'll back your play. But understand this, once you marry Eleanor Ashford, you're committed. There's no walking away from this, no matter what happens." "I know. And if you fail, if Cole gets to her despite everything you do?" William met his eyes steadily. "Then at least I'll die trying, which is more than I did for Sarah." The marshal let him go, and William walked out into the afternoon sun, mounted his horse, and turned back toward Thorn's Peak. He had one more day to prepare, one more day to make sure his defenses were as strong as possible, and then he would marry Eleanor Ashford and dare Cole and Victoria to try stopping them. But as he rode through the mountain pass, William could not shake the feeling that something was coming, something worse than gunfights and legal battles, something that would test him in ways he was not sure he could survive. He just did not know what it was yet. 50 miles away in the parlor of Willow Creek Estate, Victoria Ashford poured tea for Harrison Cole with hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts at control. 3 days since the will had been read. 3 days since Eleanor and that damned lawyer had escaped. And now word had reached her that Eleanor was at Thorn's Peak preparing to marry William Thorn. "If they marry," Victoria said, setting down the teapot with more force than necessary, "I lose everything. The estate, the land, the income. 24 years I've lived here, and that bastard girl will take it all." Cole sipped his tea calmly. "Then we ensure the marriage doesn't happen." "How you've already tried killing her. You failed. And now she's surrounded by Thorn's men behind walls protected by one of the deadliest shots in 3 states. Victoria's voice rose. "We can't attack Thorn's Peak directly." "No." Cole set down his cup. "But we don't have to. We just need to get Thorn to leave." Victoria stared at him. "He won't abandon Eleanor. Not now. He will if the right bait is offered." Cole pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I took the liberty of drafting a letter. I thought you might want to approve it before I have it delivered." Victoria unfolded the paper and read. Her eyes widened. Sarah Bennett? But she's dead. Is she? Cole smiled. Thorne believes she drowned, but he's never been entirely convinced. There's always been doubt in his mind, a suspicion that something about her death didn't add up. Because you arranged her disappearance. I did. Paid her $5,000 to leave Thorne and start over in California. Threatened her father's life to make sure she cooperated, and then I made sure everyone believed she was dead. Cole leaned forward. But Thorne doesn't know that. And if he receives a letter saying Sarah is alive, that she's in Charleston, that she wants to see him one more time before he marries another woman, what do you think he'll do? Victoria read through the letter again more carefully. He'll go. Even knowing it might be a trap, he'll go. Because the guilt of not investigating her death has been eating at him for 3 years. Exactly. And when he leaves Thorne's Peak to chase the ghost of his dead fiancée, we take Eleanor, bring her back here, make her sign papers disclaiming any right to the estate, and if she refuses, we kill her and claim she never left Willow Creek in the first place. What about the marriage contract? Without Eleanor, there's no marriage. Without a marriage, the contract can't be executed. You retain Willow Creek, and I get the timber rights at a price we both find acceptable. Cole stood and moved to the window. William Thorne took something from me 3 years ago. He refused a legitimate business offer, treated me like I was beneath him. Now I'm going to take everything from him. His land, his fiancée, his pride. And when I'm done, he'll understand what it costs to say no to Harrison Cole. Victoria stared at the letter in her hands. It was brilliant and terrible in equal measure. It would work because it played on Thorne's deepest weakness, his guilt over failing Sarah Bennett. When do we send it? She asked. Tonight. He'll receive it tomorrow evening, the night before his wedding. When he's already on edge, already questioning whether he's doing the right thing, the timing will make him impulsive. Cole turned back to face her. And impulsive men make fatal mistakes. Victoria folded the letter carefully. And if he brings Eleanor with him? He won't. He'll think he's protecting her by leaving her at Thorne's Peak with his men. He'll go alone, convinced he can handle whatever trap might be waiting. Cole's smile widened. That's how guilt works, Victoria. It makes smart men stupid. And William Thorne has been drowning in guilt for 3 long years. The evening before the wedding, William stood in his study reviewing the final preparations. Edmund Porter, his lawyer, had drawn up all necessary documents. Marshal Thompson had agreed to perform the ceremony and serve as official witness. Mrs. Hayes had prepared the house for the small gathering of friends and workers who would attend. Everything was ready. Everything was in place. So why did William feel like he was standing on the edge of a precipice waiting to fall? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. One of his ranch hands entered holding an envelope. This just arrived, sir. Man on horseback delivered it and rode off before anyone could question him. William took the envelope, noted the lack of any marking or seal, and dismissed the hand. He opened it alone, standing by the window where the last light of day filtered through. The letter inside was written in a careful feminine script he did not recognize. Dear Mr. Thorne, I am writing to inform you that Sarah Bennett is alive and currently residing in Charleston. She did not drown 3 years ago. She left of her own accord, but now wishes to see you one final time before you marry another woman. If you wish to know the truth about what happened, come to Willow Creek Estate tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock. Come alone. If you bring anyone with you, or if you tell anyone about this letter, Sarah will disappear again, and you will never have the answers you seek. I know this seems impossible. I know you will suspect a trap, but Sarah Bennett is alive, and she is waiting for you. The choice of whether to learn the truth is yours. A friend. William read the letter 3 times. His hands completely steady. His breathing controlled his mind, working through possibilities with the tactical precision of a man trained to assess threats. This was a trap. Obviously a trap. Cole and Victoria trying to lure him away from Thorne's Peak, trying to separate him from Eleanor so they could take her back. He should ignore it, should burn the letter and focus on tomorrow's wedding, should tell Marshal Thompson and let the law handle it. But Sarah Bennett, alive. For 3 years, William had lived with the certainty that she was dead, had attended her funeral, seen the closed casket, stood by while they lowered her into the ground, had tried to tell himself that her death was not his fault, that there was nothing he could have done. But he had never quite believed it. There had always been something wrong about the official story. Sarah was too strong a swimmer to drown in a river she knew well. The body had been too damaged to identify with certainty. The timing had been too convenient, coming just days after her father's gambling debts to Cole had become impossible to hide. William had suspected, had questioned. But in the end, grief and guilt had been easier than investigation. Accepting her death had been easier than facing the possibility that he had failed to protect her while she was still alive. Now someone was offering him the truth, and even knowing it was almost certainly a lie designed to manipulate him, William found himself unable to simply walk away. Eleanor deserved better than a husband who carried this weight of uncertainty into their marriage. She deserved a man who could commit fully without the ghost of a dead fiancé standing between them. And if Sarah was alive, if she had left him deliberately rather than dying, then William needed to know, needed to understand, needed to finally close that chapter of his life before he could open a new one with Eleanor. He made his decision in the space between heartbeats. He would go to Willow Creek Estate, alone. Tonight, not tomorrow, catching Cole off guard if this was indeed a trap. He would find out the truth about Sarah Bennett once and for all, and then he would return to Thorn's Peak and marry Eleanor with no ghosts left to haunt him. It was the logical choice, the right choice, the choice that would finally give him peace. William Thorn was an intelligent man, a tactical thinker, a veteran who had survived 4 years of war by being careful and methodical. But he was also a man who had lived with guilt for 3 years. And guilt made smart men stupid. He found Eleanor in the library, curled in a chair by the fire with a book open on her lap. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression made him pause. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question, a statement. William stopped in the doorway. "How did you know?" "Because you looked the way my father looked the last time I saw him. Like a man who's made a decision he knows is wrong but can't seem to help himself from making anyway." Eleanor closed her book and set it aside. Where are you going? He should lie, should protect her from the knowledge of what he was about to do. Instead, he found himself telling her the truth. He showed her the letter, watched her face as she read it, saw the moment she understood. "This is a trap," Eleanor said, her voice flat. "I know. Then why are you even considering going?" William moved into the room and sat down across from her. "Because if Sarah is alive, if she left me instead of dying, I need to know. I need to understand what happened. And I need to let her go before I can truly commit to you. You could be walking into an ambush. Probably. You could be killed. Possibly." Eleanor stood abruptly, her book falling to the floor unnoticed. "This is exactly what Cole wants. He's counting on your guilt. He knows you'll come, knows you can't resist the chance to find answers, even if those answers are lies designed to separate you from your defenses. I know all of that, Eleanor. I'm not a fool." "Then don't act like one." Her voice rose, and William saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Don't leave me the night before our wedding. Don't give Cole and Victoria exactly what they want. Don't throw away everything we're trying to build because of a woman who's been dead for 3 years. If she's dead, then I have nothing to fear from this meeting. And if she's alive, I need to know." "Why? Why does it matter now?" William stood and moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "Because when I stand beside you tomorrow and speak vows, I want to mean them. I want to be able to promise you my loyalty, my protection, my partnership, without any part of me wondering what might have happened if Sarah had lived. I want to close that door completely before I open a new one with you." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "And if I asked you not to go? If I told you that your guilt is less important than your life, than our future together? Would you stay?" William turned to face her. "Would you want me to? Would you want a husband who spent the rest of his life wondering, questioning, unable to fully commit because part of him was still chasing ghosts. I want a husband who's alive, who's here, who doesn't throw his life away chasing a woman who left him 3 years ago. Then you'll have one. I'll go to Willow Creek, I'll find out the truth, and I'll be back before dawn in time for the wedding. William moved toward the door. I promise you, Eleanor, I will come back. That's what my father said the morning he died. William stopped his hand on the doorframe. For a long moment he stood frozen, torn between the weight of guilt that had been crushing him for 3 years and the new obligation he had taken on when he chose to protect Eleanor. In the end, guilt won. Because guilt always won. It had been his constant companion since the war, since Sarah's death, since every failure and loss he had ever experienced, and he could not imagine a future free of it without first facing the past that had created it. "I'm sorry," he said without turning around, "but I have to do this." He left before she could respond, collected his rifle and revolver, saddled his horse, and rode out of Thorn's Peak into the gathering darkness. Behind him, Eleanor stood alone in the library, her hands clenched at her sides, tears of frustration and fear running down her face. And then she moved. Not to her room to weep, not to the window to watch him disappear. She went directly to Mrs. Hayes. "Get me Marshall Thompson." Eleanor said, her voice hard as steel. "Get me Mr. Porter. Get me every man on this property who can shoot straight and ride fast. And do it now." Mrs. Hayes stared at her. "Miss Eleanor, what's happening?" "William is walking into a trap, and I'll be damned if I sit here and let him die because he's too stubborn to see it." For the first time in 24 years, Eleanor Ashford was not invisible. She was not passive. She was not waiting to be saved. She was choosing to fight. William reached Willow Creek Estate just after 9 o'clock. The house was dark except for a single lamp burning in what he recognized as the main parlor. He tied his horse in a copse of trees a quarter-mile from the house and approached on foot, rifle ready, every sense alert for ambush. The night was cold and clear, the moon 3/4 full and bright enough to cast sharp shadows across the ground. William moved from cover to cover, using skills learned during 4 years of war skills he had hoped never to use again, but had never forgotten. He reached the house and paused, listening. No voices, no movement, just the lamp burning in that one window. Too quiet, too convenient. William almost turned back, almost decided that Eleanor was right, that this was suicide masquerading as duty. Then a voice called from inside the house. A woman's voice. "William, I know you're out there. Please, I just want to talk." Not Sarah's voice. The pitch was wrong, the accent different. But William's heart still hammered in his chest, his breath coming faster, his hands beginning that familiar tremor that signaled the edge of his control. He forced himself to breathe. Counted. 1, 2, 3. The tremor slowed, but did not stop. William moved to the door and opened it slowly, the Winchester raised and ready. The parlor was indeed lit by a single lamp, but the woman sitting in the chair beside it was not Sarah Bennett. It was Victoria Ashford, and she was smiling. "Mr. Thorne," she said pleasantly, "how predictable of you to come." William swung the rifle around, already knowing what he would find. 6 men stepped out of the shadows, all armed, all with guns pointed directly at him. Harrison Cole emerged from the hallway, his own shotgun cradled casually in his arms. "William Thorne, as foolish as I'd hoped." William kept the Winchester steady, his mind calculating odds and angles. 6 men plus Cole, 7 targets. He had 15 rounds between the rifle and his revolver. Possible but unlikely. And even if he killed them all, there was a good chance he would die in the process. "Sarah's not here," William said flatly. "Of course not. She's been dead for 3 years, just like you thought." Cole stepped closer, his smile cold and satisfied. "Or rather, she's been in California for 3 years, living off the money I gave her to disappear and let you think she was dead." The words hit William like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Am I? Think about it, Thorne. Sarah's father owed me $5,000. Gambling debts he couldn't pay. I offered Sarah a deal, leave you fake her death, and I'd forgive the debt. She refused at first. Said she loved you. Cole's smile widened. So I told her I'd kill her father, slowly, make her watch, and suddenly she was very cooperative. William's hands tightened on the rifle. If Sarah's alive, where is she? California, San Francisco, last I heard. Started a new life with a new name, and the funny thing is, Thorne, she didn't even argue that hard. Once she understood I was serious about killing her father, she agreed within an hour. Cole leaned against the wall completely at ease. So you see, she didn't love you enough to stay. Didn't love you enough to trust you to protect her and her father. She chose him over you, and you never even knew. William felt something breaking inside him, not his heart. That had broken 3 years ago. This was something else. The last thread of hope that maybe Sarah's death had been beyond his control, that there was nothing he could have done. Now he knew the truth. She had left him, had chosen to leave, and he had been too blind, too weak, too wrapped in his own grief to even investigate properly. Cole was right. William had failed her, not by letting her die, but by never realizing she was alive. While you're standing here learning the truth, Cole continued conversationally, my men are riding to Thorne's Peak. By morning we'll have Eleanor Ashford back at Willow Creek where she belongs, and you'll be dead in a ditch somewhere having thrown away everything for a woman who didn't want you. The gunfight lasted 11 seconds. William shot 3 men before they could react, dropped and rolled as their return fire tore through the air. Where he had been standing came up firing his revolver and killed a 4th man as he tried to reload. But numbers mattered. The remaining men circled him, forced him toward a corner, and finally one of them caught him with a rifle butt across the back of his wounded shoulder. William went down his weapon, skittering across the floor, pain exploding through his body. They bound his hands and dragged him down to the cellar, threw him against the stone wall, and locked the door behind them. William sat in the darkness, blood running from his reopened shoulder. Wound his leg throbbing where they had kicked him, and for the first time in 3 years he let himself feel the full weight of his failures. He had failed Sarah, had been so wrapped in his own need to appear strong that he had never seen her fear, never protected her from Cole's threats. And now he had failed Eleanor. Had left her at Thorne's Peak with a reduced guard, had walked straight into Cole's trap, despite her warnings, had thrown away any chance of protecting her because his guilt mattered more than his duty. William Thorne, who had survived 4 years of war, who had killed 47 men and lived with their faces in his nightmares, who had built an empire from nothing, had just made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. And Eleanor would pay the price for his failure. At Thorne's Peak, Eleanor stood in the yard surrounded by 15 armed men, Marshall Thompson and Edmund Porter. The moon was bright overhead, casting everything in silver light. "How many men did Cole send?" she asked Marshall Thompson. "My deputy counted 6 riders heading this way from Willow Creek. They'll arrive within the hour." "And how many men do we have?" 15 here, plus myself and Porter." Eleanor looked at Mrs. Hayes, who stood on the porch with a rifle in her hands. The old woman nodded once, fierce and determined. "Then we'll be ready," Eleanor said. She turned to face the assembled men. "Harrison Cole thinks I'm a helpless woman who needs to be rescued or controlled. He thinks that because William left I'll collapse, that I'll be easy to take." She paused, letting her voice carry across the yard. "He's wrong. I've spent 24 years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like I don't matter. And I'm done with that. Tonight we show Cole what it costs to underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose." The men exchanged glances. Then one by one they nodded. "When Cole's men arrive," Eleanor continued, "they'll expect to find the house unguarded, the gates open, me alone and vulnerable. Instead, they'll find every approach covered, every man armed and ready, and they'll find me standing in the center of it all, daring them to try taking me." "And if they do try?" one of the men asked. Eleanor's expression hardened. "Then we bury them in the mountains, and we make sure Cole understands that Thorne's Peak is not a place anyone attacks twice." Marshall Thompson stepped forward. "Miss Eleanor, that's a declaration of war." "No, Marshall. That's a woman refusing to be a victim. There's a difference." An hour later, when 6 riders approached Thorn's Peak and found the gates barred and 15 rifles pointed at them from the walls, they understood immediately that they had miscalculated. Eleanor stood at the main gate lamp in hand, clearly visible. "Tell Harrison Cole," she called out, her voice carrying in the night air, "that if he wants me, he'll have to go through every man who's chosen to stand with me. Tell him that William Thorn may have walked into his trap, but I won't. And tell him that if he's harmed William in any way, I will spend every penny of Willow Creek estate hunting him down." The riders exchanged uncertain glances. Then, without a word, they turned and rode back the way they had come. Eleanor waited until they disappeared into the darkness. Then she turned to Marshal Thompson. "Now we go get William, and we finish this." The cellar door crashed open 3 hours before dawn. William looked up from where he sat against the wall, expecting Cole or Victoria coming to gloat or kill him. Instead, Eleanor stood in the doorway with a rifle in her hands and murder in her eyes. "I told you it was a trap," she said. Behind her, Marshal Thompson and 15 armed men secured the house. William heard shouts, gunfire, the sounds of Cole's remaining men being overwhelmed by a force they had not expected. Eleanor crossed to William and cut his bonds with a knife, her movements efficient and controlled. "Can you walk?" "Yes." William's voice was hoarse. "How did you—" "I'm not helpless, William, and I'm not going to sit in a tower waiting to be rescued while you throw your life away because of guilt." She hauled him to his feet, supporting his weight with surprising strength. "Now come on, we have a wedding to get to." They found Cole upstairs, cornered in the study by Marshal Thompson and 3 men with rifles. Victoria huddled in a corner, all her arrogance gone, replaced by genuine terror. Marshal Thompson turned as William and Eleanor entered. "Cole's been telling me an interesting story. Something about paying Sarah Bennett to fake her death, about threatening her father, about manipulating you for 3 years. Cole's face was white with fury. "You have no proof." "Actually, we do." Porter stepped forward with a telegraph in his hand. "I took the liberty of contacting authorities in San Francisco this evening. Sarah Bennett is alive, living under her real name, and she's agreed to testify against you. She's been living in fear for 3 years, Cole, afraid you'd kill her father if she ever came forward. But now that you're going to jail anyway, she's willing to tell the truth about what you did." Cole's expression shifted through shock to rage to something like despair. "I'll fight this. I have money lawyers." "You have nothing," William said quietly. He stepped forward, Eleanor still at his side. "Sarah left because you threatened her. You manipulated her, terrorized her, and then made me believe she was dead. You killed Whitman. You tried to kill Eleanor, and you've just lost everything." Marshal Thompson gestured to his men. "Harrison Cole, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, for fraud, for extortion, and for any other crimes I think of between here and the jail." As they took Cole away in chains, William turned to Victoria. She shrank back against the wall, her face mottled with fear and rage. "I'll challenge the contract," she said desperately. "I'll prove Eleanor has no right." "You'll do nothing," William said flatly. "Because if you try, I will dedicate every resource I have to destroying you. I'll dig up every crime you've committed, every cruelty you inflicted on Eleanor for 24 years, and I'll make sure everyone in 3 states knows exactly what kind of woman you are." Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "You can leave North Carolina," William continued. "Take whatever personal possessions you want from this house. I'll even give you $500 to start over somewhere else. But you'll sign a document relinquishing all claim to Willow Creek Estate, and you'll never come near Eleanor again." "And if I refuse?" William's smile was colder than Eleanor had ever seen. "Then I'll remember that you conspired to have my wife murdered, and I'll respond accordingly. Your choice, Victoria. Exile with money or jail with nothing." Victoria signed the papers. As dawn broke over Thorn's Peak, William and Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and red. Neither had slept. Both were exhausted, bloodied, and shaken, but they were alive, together, and victorious. "I'm sorry," William said quietly. "You were right. I walked straight into that trap because I couldn't let go of guilt over Sarah. I know. Eleanor did not look at him. But you're here now, and that's what matters. Eleanor, about Sarah. Cole told you she's alive, that she left you. Eleanor finally turned to face him. Do you still love her? William was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I don't know if I ever loved her, or if I loved the idea of her. The idea of someone who needed me, who made me feel less alone. But she's gone. She made her choice 3 years ago, and I need to accept that and move forward. Can you stand beside me tomorrow and speak vows without her ghost between us? I think. William paused, searching for words. I think I need to try. I think you deserve that. And I think maybe I deserve a chance to get this right. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold but steady. Then let's get married. Not because of the contract, not because of duty, but because we've both earned the right to choose our own futures. And I'm choosing you. William squeezed her hand gently. Even after I failed you tonight. You didn't fail me. You made a mistake, and then I came and got you, and we fixed it together. Eleanor managed a tired smile. That's what partners do, William. They cover each other's weaknesses. They save each other when needed, and they choose each other every single day. As the sun cleared the mountains, William Thorne and Eleanor Ashford stood together on the porch of Thorne's Peak, two people who had survived betrayal, violence, and the weight of the past. Tomorrow, they would speak vows that would bind their lives together. But today, in this moment, they had something more important than promises. They had understanding. They had respect. And they had the beginning of something that might, with time and patience and choice, become love. The story was not over. But the hardest part, the breaking and rebuilding, the confronting of ghosts, and the facing of fears, that part was done. Now came the work of learning to live again. Together. The morning of the wedding broke clear and cold, the November sun climbing over the eastern peaks and flooding Thorne's Peak with golden light. William stood in his study, dressed in a simple black suit, his hands steady as he adjusted his collar in the mirror. No tremor this morning, no memories of war or death or failure crowding his mind. Just the knowledge that in 1 hour he would stand before witnesses and bind his life to Eleanor Ashford's, not because duty demanded it, but because he had chosen it. A knock at the door. Marshal Thompson entered, also dressed for the ceremony, his weathered face showing something that might have been approval. "You ready for this?" Thompson asked. William turned from the mirror. "Yes." "That's it? Just yes? No doubts? No second thoughts? No wondering if you're making the biggest mistake of your life?" "I already made the biggest mistake of my life 2 nights ago when I walked into Cole's trap. Everything after that is just trying to do better." William moved to the window and looked out at the garden where 50 chairs had been set up among the mountain laurel. "Eleanor saved me, Daniel. She didn't have to. She could have taken the money I offered and disappeared, but she chose to come after me, to fight for me, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving she didn't make that choice in vain." Thompson studied him for a long moment. "You know marriage isn't about grand gestures and dramatic rescues. It's about the small choices, the daily decisions to put someone else's needs alongside your own. Can you do that?" "I don't know, but I'm going to try. That's all any of us can do." They walked together down to the garden where guests were already gathering, ranch hands in their best clothes, neighbors from surrounding properties, Edmund Porter with his legal documents, Mrs. Hayes directing the kitchen staff who had prepared food for the celebration afterward. And at the edge of the garden, speaking quietly with the judge who would perform the ceremony, stood Eleanor. William stopped walking, simply stopped and stared, because for the first time since he had met her 5 days ago, Eleanor was not dressed in torn, bloodied clothes or borrowed dresses that did not quite fit. She wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Hayes had somehow procured, her dark hair pulled back with pins, her green eyes clear and calm as she listened to whatever the judge was saying. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Too thin, her face too angular, her hands bearing the calluses of a woman who had worked most of her life without complaint or recognition. But standing there in the morning light surrounded by mountain laurel and pine, Eleanor Ashford was the most honest thing William had ever seen. No artifice, no pretense, just a woman who had survived 24 years of being invisible and had emerged with her dignity intact and her strength unbroken. She looked up and caught him staring. For a moment, they simply held each other's gaze across the garden. Then, Eleanor smiled a real smile that reached her eyes, and William found himself smiling back without thinking about it. "That's how you know," Thompson said quietly beside him. "Know what? That you're making the right choice, when just looking at her makes you want to try being a better man than you thought you could be." The ceremony itself was brief. Judge Harrison had known both the Thorne and Ashford families for decades, and he spoke simply about the promises being made and the seriousness of the commitment they represented. "Marriage is not a contract," the judge said, addressing William and Eleanor, but speaking for everyone present. "It is a covenant, a binding of two lives together not just legally, but in the deepest sense. It is a promise to stand together through whatever comes, to choose each other daily, to build something that matters more than either individual ever could alone." He paused, looking at each of them in turn. "William Thorne, you come here having survived war and loss and 3 years of living more than truly being alive. Eleanor Ashford, you come having survived neglect and cruelty and 2 decades of being treated as invisible. Both of you bear scars. Both of you have known pain. And now you choose to face the future together, to combine your strengths and support each other's weaknesses." The judge opened his book but did not read from it. Instead he said, "Speak your vows, not the words I give you, but the promises you truly mean to keep." William turned to face Eleanor, fully taking both her hands in his. He had spent the early hours of morning thinking about what he would say, discarding flowery speeches and grand declarations in favor of simple truth. "Eleanor Ashford," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. "I stand here today not because a contract written before we were born demands it, not because duty or obligation or guilt drove me here. I stand here because 5 days ago you reminded me what it means to care about something beyond my own survival." He squeezed her hands gently. "I promise to protect you, not because you are weak, but because you deserve to feel safe after years of living in fear. I promise to listen to you, not because I have all the answers, but because you see things I cannot. I promise to choose you not just today, but every day, even when it's difficult, even when I fail, even when the ghosts of the past try to pull me backward." William paused, searching for the right words. "And I promise to try to love you, not perfectly, not immediately, but honestly. To open the parts of myself I've kept locked away since the war, since Sarah's death, since I learned that feeling anything was dangerous. You've earned the right to know the real William Thorne, not just the controlled, efficient man I've made myself into. And I promise to show you that man slowly, carefully, one day at a time." Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears, but she did not look away. When William finished, she took a breath and began her own vows. "William Thorne, I stand here today because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw a person worth saving, worth protecting, worth making promises for." Her voice was steady despite the tears. "I promise to stand beside you, not behind you, not in front of you, but beside you as an equal partner. I promise to remind you that your past does not define your future, that the men you killed in war do not determine the man you can become in peace. I promise to see you, truly see you the way you have seen me." She paused, then smiled slightly. "And I promise to love you, not the idea of you, not the mountain man who saved me, but the real William Thorne with all his scars and nightmares and carefully hidden vulnerabilities. I promise to love the man you are today and the man you are becoming. And I promise to choose you every single day, no matter what comes." The silence that followed was profound. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Then Judge Harrison said quietly, "By the authority vested in me by the state of North Carolina, I pronounce you husband and wife. "William, you may kiss your bride." William leaned forward slowly, giving Eleanor time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. Their lips met in a kiss that was tender and uncertain, and filled with the promise of learning each other, of building something real from the foundation of shared survival. When they pulled apart, applause rippled through the gathered witnesses. Not loud or raucous, but genuine. These were people who understood that they had just witnessed not a business arrangement, but a real union between two people who had earned their chance at happiness. As William and Eleanor walked back down the aisle between the chairs, hands clasped, Eleanor leaned close and whispered, "I was terrified you would not make it back in time." "So was I," William admitted, "but you made sure I did. You came for me when I was too foolish to save myself." "That's what partners do." "Yes," William said, and this time when he smiled it felt natural. "That's exactly what partners do." The celebration that followed was modest but genuine. Food and drink, music from a fiddle player. One of the ranch hands had brought toasts from Marshall Thompson and Edmund Porter that praised the couple's courage and resilience without dwelling on the violence that had brought them together. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to drift away, William and Eleanor found themselves alone on the porch, watching the sun descend toward the western peaks. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "Now we figure out how to actually be married, how to live together, work together, build a life together." William glanced at her. "I won't pretend it will be easy. I'm not good at sharing space, at considering someone else's needs, at being vulnerable. And I'm not good at taking up space, at believing I deserve consideration, at trusting that kindness is real." Eleanor turned to face him. "But we'll learn together, one day at a time." William nodded. "One day at a time." Inside Thorne's Peaks, Mrs. Hayes was directing the cleaning of the celebration, her movements efficient and practiced, but she paused when she saw William and Eleanor on the porch, standing close but not touching, talking quietly in the fading light. She had served the Thorne family for 40 years, had watched William grow from a sensitive boy into a hardened man, watched him survive war and loss and 3 years of living death. She had wondered if he would ever truly live again. Now, watching him with Eleanor, Mrs. Hayes allowed herself to hope. The first year of marriage was not easy. William and Eleanor moved through the house like strangers, learning each other's patterns, careful not to intrude, uncertain how much space each needed. They shared meals in awkward silence, worked on managing the combined estates with businesslike efficiency, and slept in separate bedrooms because neither quite knew how to bridge that final gap of intimacy. But slowly, carefully, they began to build something real. Spring came to the Blue Ridge Mountains, and with it came the work of planting and building and managing 2 estates that now functioned as one. Eleanor took charge of Willow Creek not as William's proxy, but as its rightful owner. She met with workers, renegotiated contracts that Victoria had used to exploit the people who worked the land, raised wages, and improved living conditions. Word spread quickly. Eleanor Thorne was nothing like her stepmother. She was fair, intelligent, and genuinely cared about the people who depended on the estate for their livelihood. William watched from a distance, proud but careful not to interfere. This was Eleanor's domain, her chance to prove that she could build and manage and lead without him hovering protectively. One evening in May, he found her in the study at Willow Creek, surrounded by account books and correspondence. She looked up as he entered, exhaustion evident in the set of her shoulders. "You're working too hard," William said. "So are you." "Yes, but I'm used to it. You're not." Eleanor set down her pen. "I spent 24 years being invisible. Now I'm visible, and I'm not going to waste this chance by being fragile or helpless. This estate is mine, William, and I'm going to make it thrive." William studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I know you will. I've seen how the workers respond to you. They respect you, trust you. That's not something that can be forced or bought. You've earned it." "Did you come here just to tell me I'm working too hard?" "No." William moved into the room and sat across from her. "I came because I realized we've been married for 6 months and I still barely know you. We work together, we manage these estates together, we're building an empire together. But we're not really partners, not yet. What do you suggest? Tell me something true, something you've never told anyone." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "When I was 8 years old, Victoria told me that my mother was a prostitute, that my father only married her because I was already on the way, and that he regretted it every day after. She said that was why he could barely look at me, why he never defended me, why he let her treat me the way she did, because seeing me reminded him of his greatest mistake." William's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "That was cruel and probably untrue. I know that now. But for 16 years I believed it. Believed I was fundamentally unworthy of love or kindness or even basic decency. It wasn't until I read your mother's letter that I understood the truth. My mother was Grace Ashford, daughter of a respected family, beloved friend of Catherine Thorne. She died when I was 3, and my father never recovered from losing her. He still should have protected you." "Yes, he should have. But he was weak, and Victoria was strong, and he took the path of least resistance." Eleanor met William's eyes. "I've forgiven him for that. Not because he deserves forgiveness, but because carrying that anger was poisoning me. And I want to live without that poison." William was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When I killed my first man at Gettysburg, I was 19 years old. He was probably 18, just a boy in a Confederate uniform. I shot him from 100 yards out, watched him fall, and felt nothing. No guilt, no horror, no humanity. Just relief that I was still alive, and he was not." He looked down at his hands. "That scared me more than the killing itself. The realization that I could end a life and feel nothing. That war had already turned me into something less than human. So I started counting. Every face, every name, if I could learn it, every detail I could remember. 47 men by the time the war ended. And I made myself remember each one, made myself feel what I should have felt in the moment, because I was terrified that if I didn't I would become my father, a man who valued nothing except power and control." Eleanor stood and moved around the desk to stand beside him. She did not touch him, but her presence was comforting in a way William had not expected. "You're not your father," she said quietly. "You're the man who kept a promise to protect someone he barely knew. You're the man who married me not because you had to, but because you chose to. And you're the man who's trying every day to be better than he was the day before." "How do you know?" "Because I see you, William. I see how you treat the workers, how you deal fairly, even when it would be more profitable to be ruthless. I see how you wake in the night with nightmares and force yourself to breathe through them rather than reaching for the whiskey bottle. I see the effort it costs you to be gentle when everything in your upbringing taught you that gentleness was weakness." She finally did touch him, placing one hand on his shoulder. "You're not perfect, but you're good, and that matters more than you know." William reached up and covered her hand with his, and for the first time in 6 months, the careful distance between them began to close. Summer brought the first real intimacy. Not physical, though, that would come later, but emotional. They began eating dinner together, not in silence, but in conversation. William told Eleanor about his plans for expanding the timber operation, and she offered suggestions that he had not considered. Eleanor shared her ideas for improving conditions at Willow Creek, and William provided connections and resources to make those ideas reality. They began reading together in the evenings, sitting in companionable silence in the library, occasionally sharing passages that struck them as particularly meaningful or beautiful. They went riding through the mountains with William showing Eleanor the hidden valleys and secret trails he had discovered during his years of solitary wandering. And slowly, carefully, they learned to trust each other, not just as allies, but as companions. Fall came, and with it came a night when William woke screaming from a nightmare about Spotsylvania. He found himself standing in the hallway outside his bedroom, shaking uncontrollably, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Eleanor appeared in her doorway wrapped in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply took his hand and led him downstairs to the library, sat him in a chair by the fire, and held him while he fought his way back to control. "Tell me," she said softly. So William told her about the battle where his leg had been shattered, about lying in the mud for 6 hours, waiting for stretcher bearers while men died around him, about the field hospital where they cut bullets out of his flesh without anesthetic because supplies had run low, about the faces of the men he had killed, how they visited him in dreams and demanded to know why they were dead while he lived. When he finished, Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You survived because you were supposed to survive. Because 47 years later you would be sitting here with me learning how to live again. And those men, they didn't die so you could punish yourself with guilt. They died because war is terrible and senseless and destroys everyone it touches. How do you know that's true? Because if there's no purpose to your survival beyond guilt and suffering, then what was the point? But if you survived so you could be here now, so you could honor your mother's promise and protect someone who needed protecting and build something good from all that loss, then their deaths weren't entirely meaningless, because you're using your life to make the world a little less cruel." William looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman he had married, but someone who understood pain and loss and the struggle to find meaning in survival. "When did you become so wise?" he asked. "When I spent 24 years watching people and learning to read what they couldn't say out loud." Eleanor smiled slightly. "Invisibility has its advantages. People reveal their true selves when they think no one is watching." "I see you," William said. "I've always seen you. From the moment you knelt beside Whitman in that clearing and demanded we save him, even knowing he was dying. I saw your strength, your courage, your refusal to give up. I know. That's why I married you." They stayed in the library until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, slowly closing the final gaps between them. And when William finally returned to his bedroom, he did not sleep alone. Eleanor came with him not for passion, but for comfort, and they lay together in the darkness, simply holding each other. Two people who had survived the unsurvivable, learning that they did not have to survive alone anymore. Winter of 1870 brought the news that Cole would hang for Whitman's murder. Sarah Bennett had testified against him from California, confirming everything about his threats and manipulation. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. William and Eleanor did not attend the execution. There was no triumph in watching a man die, even a man who had caused them such pain. Instead, they focused on building their life together, on the daily work of running 2 estates and learning to be truly married. Spring of 1871 brought unexpected news. Eleanor was pregnant. William learned this one evening when he found her sitting in the garden, her hand resting on her stomach, her expression a mixture of joy and terror. "Are you afraid?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Yes. My mother died when I was 3. What if I'm like her? What if I can't survive childbirth?" William took her hand. "You're the strongest woman I know. You survived Victoria Cole and me at my worst. You'll survive this too." "How can you be sure?" "Because we've already survived everything else together, and we'll survive this the same way." The pregnancy was difficult. Eleanor was sick most of the first 3 months, weak and exhausted. William hovered protectively, driving both Eleanor and Mrs. Hayes to distraction with his constant worry. But as the months passed and Eleanor's body changed, William found himself feeling something he had not felt since before the war: hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that held something more than just survival and duty. December came cold and clear. Eleanor's labor began early on a morning when snow was falling softly outside the windows. Dr. Mitchell arrived from town, Mrs. Hayes took charge with calm efficiency, and William was banished to his study to wait. He lasted 20 minutes before pacing. An hour before the shaking started. 2 hours before Marshal Thompson, who had ridden over to provide moral support, forcibly sat him down and made him drink whiskey. "She's going to be fine," Thompson said. "You don't know that." "No, but I know Eleanor Thorne. She's not a woman who gives up. Not on herself, not on that baby, and not on you." 3 hours into labor, Eleanor screamed. William started toward the bedroom, but Thompson and 2 ranch hands physically restrained him. You go in there now, you'll just distract the doctor and Mrs. Hayes. Let them do their work. 4 hours. 5. The screaming stopped, replaced by an ominous silence that was somehow worse. Then a new sound. Thin, angry, unmistakably alive. A baby crying. Dr. Mitchell emerged 10 minutes later, tired but smiling. Healthy boy, strong lungs. Mother's exhausted but fine. You can go in now. William did not remember crossing the room. He was simply there, standing beside the bed where Eleanor lay propped up on pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "We have a son," she said, her voice hoarse but filled with wonder. William looked down at the baby, at the small red face and tiny fists, and felt something break open in his chest. Not grief this time, but something overwhelming and terrifying in its intensity. Love. Pure, unconditional, fierce love for this tiny human who had not existed 6 hours ago, but who now seemed like the entire center of the world. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. William thought about his father, about the hard, cold man who had valued nothing except business and control. Then he thought about the promise that had brought him and Eleanor together, about the covenant between families that had saved both their lives. "Daniel," he said, "after my father. Not because he was perfect, but because he kept one promise that mattered. The marriage contract. And I want our son to know that promises matter even when they're difficult, even when they cost us something." "Daniel Thorne," Eleanor repeated, testing the name. "I like it." She looked up at William, tears streaming down her face. "We made this. You and I. We made something beautiful." William sat carefully on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around both of them. His wife and his son, the family he had never expected to have. "Yes," he whispered, "we did." The years passed with the kind of speed that only becomes apparent when looking back. Daniel grew from infant to toddler, to boy, curious and energetic, and blessed with his mother's intelligence and his father's determination. William taught him to ride and shoot and track. Eleanor taught him to read and calculate and think. But most importantly, they both taught him kindness. "Why do we give food to the Miller family?" Daniel asked one day when he was 9, after helping William deliver supplies to a neighboring property. "Because Mr. Miller was injured and cannot work, and his family needs to eat." "But is that our duty?" William knelt down to look his son in the eye. "Duty is important, but this is more than duty. This is compassion. This is choosing to help because we can, because they need it, and because it's right. Do you understand the difference? Duty is what you have to do. Compassion is what you choose to do." Exactly. And the choices we make when we don't have to do something, those are what define us as men. In 1882, Eleanor gave birth again. A daughter this time whom they named Grace Catherine after both grandmothers. William held his daughter and marveled at how something so small could contain so much promise, so much potential. By 1885, Thorne's Peak had become one of the most successful operations in 3 states. The combined estates prospered under William and Eleanor's management. Workers were paid fairly, conditions were good, and the Thorne name became synonymous with integrity and strength. But success brought its own challenges. And one spring morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at the gates of Thorne's Peak. Victoria Ashford was 66 years old now, her face lined with age and hardship. She wore a simple dress much mended and carried a single bag. She stood at the gate uncertain until one of the workers recognized her and sent word to the main house. Eleanor stood on the porch as Victoria approached. William stood beside her, protective but silent, letting Eleanor make the decision about what would happen next. Victoria stopped 10 feet away. For a long moment the two women simply looked at each other, the stepmother who had spent 24 years making a child invisible, and the woman that child had become despite everything. "Why are you here?" Eleanor asked, her voice neutral. "To apologize." Victoria's voice was hoarse, tired. "I know it's too late. I know you have every right to turn me away, but I needed to say it before I die. I was cruel to you, unnecessarily, viciously cruel, and I'm sorry." Eleanor's expression did not change. "Why were you cruel?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid your father would love you more than he loved my daughters. Afraid you would take what should have been theirs. Afraid that if I showed you any kindness, any weakness, you would destroy me the way I tried to destroy you. I was 8 years old when you married my father. I wasn't a threat, I was a child. I know that now." Victoria's voice broke. "But fear makes us irrational. And I was so consumed by fear that I couldn't see what I was doing, couldn't see that I was becoming a monster." "Where are Caroline and Isabel?" Eleanor asked, referring to her half-sisters. "Dead. Scarlet fever 3 years ago. Both of them gone within a week of each other." Victoria wiped her eyes. "I have nothing left, Eleanor. No family, no money, no home. I came here not to ask for mercy, but to tell you that you were right to survive despite me. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for." Eleanor looked at William. He nodded slightly, leaving the choice to her. She turned back to Victoria and pulled an envelope from her pocket. "This contains $500, enough to start over somewhere far from here. Take it, leave North Carolina, and never come back." Victoria stared at the envelope. "Why would you help me after everything I did?" "Because you're right. It is too late for us to have any kind of relationship, and I don't forgive you, not really, not yet. But I also won't become you. I won't let cruelty define my life the way it defined yours." Eleanor held out the envelope. "Take it and go. That's the last kindness you'll ever get from me." Victoria took the money with shaking hands. "You're a better woman than I ever was." "I know." After Victoria left, William put his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Are you all right?" "Yes. I gave her what she needed to survive, but I didn't give her forgiveness she hasn't earned, and I'm at peace with that." "Your mother would be proud of you." Eleanor leaned into his embrace. "So would yours." They stood together on the porch, watching the mountains, knowing that this chapter was finally completely closed. The fire crackled in the hearth as William Thorne paused in his telling. 75 years old now, his hands marked with age spots and old scars, but his eyes still sharp and clear. Across from him, his grandson James sat forward on the edge of the sofa, completely absorbed. "So you married her," James said. "You honored the promise." "I did more than that." William gestured around the study. "Your grandmother and I built this together. Not just the estates, not just the business, but a real partnership, a real marriage. It took time, it took work. But by the end we loved each other in a way I didn't think was possible when we started." "But you said at the beginning that you didn't love her when you married." "I didn't. I barely knew her." "But love isn't always about passion and romance, James. Sometimes it's about choice, about choosing someone every single day even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." Footsteps in the hallway. Eleanor Thorne entered 71 years old, now her dark hair gone silver, but her green eyes still bright. She carried a tea tray with steady hands. "William, you shouldn't keep James up so late with your stories." He asked about duty and obligation, about whether promises to the dead still matter. Eleanor set down the tray and settled into the chair beside William's. "And what did you tell him?" "That promises matter, but they're just the beginning. What matters more is what you do after you keep the promise, how you turn obligation into something real." James looked between his grandparents. "How long have you been married?" 47 years this November," Eleanor said. 47 years of choosing each other, of building something that matters." "Was it hard?" William and Eleanor exchanged glances. Then William said, "Sometimes. Your grandmother and I both came to the marriage with scars and pain and habits that were hard to break. We hurt each other sometimes without meaning to. We disagreed about how to raise your father, how to manage the estates, how to deal with problems as they arose. But we never stopped choosing each other," Eleanor added. "That's the secret, James. Not perfection, not passion that never fades, just the daily choice to stand together, to listen to each other, to forgive when forgiveness is needed, and fight when fighting is necessary." "My father," James said slowly. "He was like that. He always said that being a man wasn't about being the strongest or the richest or the most successful. It was about keeping your word and standing by the people who mattered. "Your father learned that from us," William said, "from watching how his mother and I built our life together, from seeing that real strength isn't about dominance or control. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when you're wrong, to ask for help when you need it." He stood slowly, joints protesting, and moved to the window. Outside, Thorn's Peak stretched across the valley, lights glowing warm in the gathering dusk. Beyond it, Willow Creek Estate merged seamlessly with the Thorn lands, two properties that had become one through marriage and time and careful stewardship. "Your father also learned about legacy," William continued, "not the land or the money or the name, but the values we pass down, the example we set, the way we treat people when no one is watching." "That's what you wanted me to learn from your story," James asked. "About legacy." "I wanted you to learn that being a man isn't about never failing. It's about what you do after you fail." William turned from the window. "I failed Sarah Bennett. I was too wrapped up in my own need to appear strong to see that she needed protection, and that failure haunted me for 3 years. But you kept the promise to protect grandmother." "I did. And more importantly, I learned from my failure with Sarah. I learned to listen better, to be more aware of what the people I cared about actually needed rather than what I assumed they needed. I learned that strength sometimes means admitting weakness." Eleanor stood and joined William at the window. Even after 47 years, they moved toward each other naturally, like planets in orbit drawn together by forces that had become instinctive. "Your father understood that," Eleanor said to James. "He was strong when strength was needed, but he was also gentle with your mother, patient with you and your siblings, kind to people who worked for him. He balanced duty with compassion, and that's the legacy he left you." "So when I don't know what to do," James said slowly, "when I'm not sure if I'm making the right choice, what should I ask myself?" William smiled. "Ask yourself 3 questions. First, am I doing this because I have to or because I choose to? Second, will this choice make me into the kind of man I want to be? And third, can I live with the consequences if I'm wrong? And if the answers are yes, yes, and yes, then you make the choice and you stand by it. You don't second-guess yourself, don't torture yourself with what-ifs, don't let fear of failure prevent you from trying." William moved back to his chair and sat down heavily. "Because here's the truth, James. You will fail sometimes. You will make mistakes. You will hurt people you care about despite your best intentions. That's part of being human. But," Eleanor continued, sitting beside William and taking his hand, "if you learn from those failures, if you apologize when you're wrong and try to do better next time, if you keep choosing to grow and improve rather than giving in to guilt or despair, then you're living with honor. And that's all any of us can do." James was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. Then he asked, "Do you ever regret it? The way you got married? That it started as duty rather than love?" William and Eleanor looked at each other, a lifetime of shared experiences passing between them in that glance. "No," William said finally, "because duty brought us together, but choice kept us together. And what we built from that foundation of obligation became something neither of us could have created alone. We became better people because we faced our struggles together. We learned things about ourselves that we never would have discovered in isolation." "Your grandfather saved me from a life of invisibility," Eleanor added. "But I saved him from a life of numbness. We rescued each other, and then we spent 47 years figuring out how to live fully, not just survive." "And our children?" James asked. "Your father, my aunts and uncles. Did you teach them all of this?" "We tried," William said. "We taught them that promises matter, that compassion is strength, that real power comes from building up rather than tearing down. We taught them to see people really see them the way I learned to see your grandmother. And we taught them that legacy isn't about what you leave behind when you die. It's about how you influence the people you touch while you're alive." Eleanor squeezed William's hand. We made mistakes as parents. We were too protective sometimes, too harsh other times. We didn't always agree on how to handle problems, but we showed our children what a real partnership looks like, what it means to choose each other daily, what it costs to love someone completely. And now they're teaching their own children, William said, looking at James. Your father taught you about duty and honor. Your mother taught you about kindness and compassion. And now it's your turn to take those lessons and make them your own, to figure out what kind of man you want to be, and have the courage to become that man even when it's difficult. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Outside, full night had fallen, and the stars were beginning to emerge over the mountains. Finally, James stood. Thank you, Grandfather, Grandmother, for telling me the truth about how you started, for showing me that perfect beginnings aren't necessary for good endings. The beginning doesn't matter nearly as much as what you do with it, William said. Remember that. After James left for bed, William and Eleanor sat together by the fire, hands clasped, looking out at the empire they had built together. Not just land and timber and money, but children and grandchildren, a legacy of values and choices that would echo forward through generations. Do you think he understood? Eleanor asked softly. He's 16. He understands some of it. The rest will make sense when he's older, when he faces his own failures and struggles and has to choose between giving up and trying again. Like we did. Like we did. Eleanor rested her head on William's shoulder. I'm glad you fired those 3 shots. 47 years ago in that forest, when you could have run but chose to save a woman you didn't know. I'm glad you made that choice. So am I. William kissed the top of her head. It was the best decision I ever made, even though I didn't know it at the time. You were worth saving, worth protecting, worth choosing every single day since. And you were worth waiting for, Eleanor replied. Worth fighting for, worth believing in, even when you didn't believe in yourself. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had started as strangers bound by duty and had become partners in the truest sense. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, honest, committed to each other through 4 decades of joy and sorrow and the ordinary miracle of daily life. Outside the mountains stood eternal under the stars. Inside Thorn's Peak, the fire burned low, and 2 old people held each other close, grateful for every year they had been given, every choice they had made, every day they had chosen each other despite the scars and pain and difficulty. The story of the mountain man and the invisible woman had become something greater than either of them alone could have imagined. It had become a legacy of love built on the foundation of duty of honor, balanced with compassion of strength, tempered by gentleness. And as William and Eleanor Thorne sat together in the study where this tale had been told, they knew that the story would continue. Through Daniel and Grace and the grandchildren who bore their names. Through the values they had taught and the example they had set. Through every person they had touched who learned that real power comes not from domination, but from choice. The choice to stand when falling would be easier. The choice to love when indifference would be safer. The choice to see people really see them when invisibility would be more convenient. William Thorne had spent 3 years dead inside after Sarah Bennett's death. And then Eleanor Ashford had reminded him what it meant to live. Not just to survive, not just to go through the motions, but to truly live with purpose and meaning and connection. Together they had built something that would outlast them both. Not just an empire of land and wealth, but a family of people who understood that obligation could be transformed into love, that duty could become joy, and that the promises we make to the dead matter most when they inspire us to choose life with the living. And that was the legacy William Thorne wanted his grandson to remember, not the violence or the grief or the failures that had marked his early years, but the choice he had made to try again to open his heart despite the risk to build something beautiful with a woman who had every reason to give up but chose instead to fight. That was what it meant to be a man. Not perfection, not fearlessness, not dominance, just the courage to keep choosing love day after day, year after year, for a lifetime. The fire burned down to embers, the stars wheeled overhead. And in the mountains of North Carolina, the story of William and Eleanor Thorne passed into family legend, a tale told to remind future generations that the best legacies are built not from grand gestures, but from the daily choice to see each other, to stand together, and to love despite the scars.